Are you spending a lot of time on repetitive tasks like...
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Michigan DSA May Day event. We're going to get started in just a couple minutes. We're just going to give folks a few more minutes to join us. If you're here for the May Day event in Town Hall with the amazing Congressman Andy Levin and Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib and other esteemed guests, you are in the right place. In the meantime, we would love it for folks to share where they're calling in from and why they joined us tonight. Why is passing one of the most consequential pieces of labor law reform in nearly 100 years so essential to building our better world? I would love to see some answers in the chat. We've got a great number of participants with us tonight. I know Anthony's calling in from Royal Oak. If you see the chat box at the bottom, you can use that to let us know where you're calling in from, and we're going to get started in a couple of minutes. Awesome. Brandon, thank you so much for sharing, calling in from Grand Rapids. And I do want to share that this is a Michigan-wide DSA event. It is the first Michigan-wide DSA event, so I'm super excited about that. We are coming together to talk about building up the labor movement. We could not be talking about something more important, in my opinion. Awesome. Alec calling in all the way from Chicago, but yes, you are my former neighbor from Farmington Hills. Maria from Lansing, thank you so much for joining us. Melissa, welcome. So lovely to see you. Judy, same. Ross, love to see it from Lansing. We've got folks in Grand Rapids. Rachel, welcome from Detroit. Chris from Detroit, I love to see it. Anthony, you're my neighbor. I'm also in West Bloomfield. Love to see West Michigan, Grand Rapids, Mount Pleasant. Oh my God. What a turnout tonight, folks. If folks want to also share why they think passing labor law reform is so essential to passing legislation like a Green New Deal and why they're motivated to be here tonight, I would love to hear your motivation and reasoning. Redford, love it. Adrian, welcome. Katie joining. GVSU YDSA, we love our YDSA folks. Vince, welcome. And Lauren, thank you. Like I said, we're going to get started in just a couple minutes, but while we wait for folks to trickle in, I did want to give everyone who's joined a chance to tell us where they're calling in from. Colin, welcome from Ferndale. One of my favorite spots, Lansing, amazing. I don't know about you all, but I am extraordinarily excited to hear from this incredible panel tonight. And I think we're gonna go ahead and get started, but not before I share why Alec is here, because I think that sets the tone for this entire conversation. Alec is here because we absolutely do need a militant, powerful labor movement. And if we're going to win Medicare for all, a Green New Deal, and more. I could not agree more. Yes, people deserve to earn more than a living wage, right? Whatever a living wage means. And they need less pressure to simply survive. That's right, Anthony. I love these answers. And I love the geographic diversity. So really quickly, before I turn it over to our esteemed guests, I am so excited to be here tonight to speak with you all about the PRO Act on this wonderful Michigan DSA May Day Town Hall. My name is Jess Newman. I am a member of Detroit DSA, and I've been a union organizer, campaign organizer, currently working in the labor movement for an organization called United for Respect. I have so much excitement to talk to you tonight about this incredible piece of legislation that would transform the way that I am able to do my job, and that we are all able to exercise our power as workers and make these bold changes possible, like we discussed. So again, we have an amazing panel of speakers tonight, and I won't take very long, but I do want to talk about the campaign that we've put together as DSA. So the PRO Act, again, represents this historic opportunity to pass the most consequential piece of civil rights legislation since the Voting Rights Act, and the most consequential piece of labor rights legislation in a century. We know that not a gear turns without our labor, and that our greatest power as workers is to withhold our labor and fight back. My dog agrees with me. You can hear him in the background, that's Rigby. And we must withhold our labor to demand that revolutionary change we need. And so in an effort to move the ball, to gear up and get this passed, we know that we have to build a mass movement, a mass coalition across the progressive spectrum. So DSA has joined forces with the AFL-CIO, with international unions like the Painters Union, IUPAT, with CWA, my former employer, with IATSE, with organizations across the progressive spectrum like Sunrise, Indivisible, Move On, Working Families Party, explicitly because we know we have to build that mass movement from A to Z, people who share the view that we must build labor power to get this passed. We have people, they have money, and they will spend it. We saw this last time in the EFCA fight in 2008, the Business Roundtable geared up like we'd never been able to see before, throwing as much money as they possibly could at lobbying every single senator to make sure that the EFCA did not pass. Now, the PRO Act represents our opportunity to make that history a reality this time. We did not have a Democratic Socialists of America in 2009. We did not have this mass movement built across this progressive spectrum last time. And we did not make 600,000 calls to the constituents of our target states last time. But we did this time. We made over 600,000 calls to West Virginia, to Maine, to Arizona, to target the senators that are not yet co-sponsors, and we know they can and should be. Those 600,000 calls has already delivered results. We have seen that Angus King of Maine announced that as a result, and he attributes it directly to the pressure that was brought by the hundreds of thousands of calls made to the constituents in his state who were transferred over to talk to him, right? It was not folks like me calling from Michigan. We were calling folks in their districts, in their states, to patch them through, to leave messages, their constituents, to talk to thousands of people about labor law reform, about their working conditions, agitating them to take action. It's incredible. Angus King announced that he's co-sponsoring the PRO Act. We got, oh my God, we had one other person. Manchin, my God, one of the biggest pieces of news in the last week. I'm sorry, guys. It's been a very long day. There have been a lot of events today. This is a very, very incredible one. But you're getting me at the tail end of a very long whirlwind of events around May Day. But we got Joe Manchin this past week, again, driving thousands of calls to his constituents, people who were genuinely moved to take action because they know that workers deserve better and that we need to build worker power to win the systemic change that we need. So, yes, thank you. I know I met your pup at the strike line, actually, very fitting. And so I could not be more excited to actually, this is perfect timing, see you, my comrade in arms, my sister in the movement, one of the most incredible representatives in the halls of Congress, other company aside, of course, but we could not be luckier to have this fighter in Congress. Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib is joining us tonight. She is the representative for District 6 in Detroit and across the area, partially outside of Detroit, and again, one of the most incredible fighters for us in Congress, a true champion for workers and the socialist movement. And she is here tonight to talk about what the PRO Act will do and why it's so important. I'm going to quickly introduce the rest of the panel, and then I'm going to turn it over to Rashida to give her remarks. Steve Babson is joining us. He's a Detroit labor historian and activist, and he is here to talk about the history of May Day, to give us a little bit of that grounding in our history. We stand on the shoulders of giants, talking about that interplay between the on-ground union organizing that built up and through the 1930s led to the the New Deal of the 1930s. That's the predecessor that we hope to channel that energy again in 2021. and how worker actions led to those concessions. Jason Krzyzak, a member of my lovely chapter, Detroit DSA, and a longtime member of the UAW Local 245 in Dearborn. He's here to talk about the importance of workers coming together to fight for a union and to fight through their union for important change like a Green New Deal and how the PRO Act can help in that fight. And then we have two amazing folks from IATSE Local 26, Josh Askamp and Tom Burke. These are folks who make our entertainment run. They're also members of Grand Rapids DSA, and they're here to talk about the impacts of the pandemic on the workplace and how the PRO Act could help us fight for workers' rights. And I would say last, but nowhere near least, we have another incredible congressperson here tonight, Andy Levin, representative from District 9, Royal Oak, and some of the suburbs, Metro Detroit area, a wonderful, incredible union advocate, a warrior for workers, comes out of the labor movement, helped start the summer organizing program for the AFL-CIO. Amazing, amazing champion. But before we get to that full panel, I do want to turn it over to our first speaker, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, who doesn't need any further introduction. And yes, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Jess. I really appreciate it. Everyone didn't hear, Jess's puppy or dog was barking, and then my dog started barking and thinking I had some dog in here, so she kind of went crazy. But not everybody saw the chat going back and forth. But yeah, I really appreciate, one of the things that I love about DSA is they never back down, and a lot of movement work is always centered on workers. And the frontline workers especially. And so I just thank you all for that so much. I'm so glad to be part of this panel discussion, but also really incredibly proud of the work that Andy Levin has continued to do in Congress. I can't stress to you all enough, it's like we have a professor of constitutional law among us. He may not technically be a professor by trade before he got there, but he really is our professor around labor rights and labor law, and he is incredibly important to this movement to get the PRO Act passed. So I'm glad he's here, and I'm hoping he will share what he saw at Amazon in Alabama. I think it's important to see what the human impact is of doing nothing and not passing the PRO Act. I think it's critically important for everyone to know, I was there when in the Michigan House when the right to work was passed. Many folks don't understand, it was a really intense moment. It's probably the handful of moments I just broke down in tears, feeling completely helpless because the attack on workers was so strong. It was so well funded by not only the DeVosses, but so many others. And it was done in the dead of night. And it was really one of the, I think, times in our state where it was a huge step back for the work that we have done here in Michigan on labor rights and worker rights. And so one of the things about the PRO Act that I love is it really does combat some of these right to work, and some of them are called something different in some ways and apply differently. But the fact that it will allow us to be able to not, members who, basically getting the benefits of those union paid members. And so it really does address that issue. I think, again, because this was a move from the right and from anti-workers and anti-union folks to try to weaken our unions who really are the safeguard for our workers against corporate greed and so much more. And so the PRO Act would allow unions to override such right to work laws and collect dues for those who opt out in order to cover the cost of collective bargaining and administration and all those things. The other really important thing, and again, I know Andy will cover this as well, is employer interference in influencing union elections. I saw this when the father of my children, their union in Mexican Industries was trying to unionize. I saw the tactics. They came to people's homes. They had mandatory meetings in the workplace. I know they did that in Amazon. It was such huge intimidation, y'all. I can't stress to you all enough that, we're dealing with workers and many folks that are living check by check. Majority of Americans live check by check. And right there in front of it, not only are they threatening, obviously, the ability to take care of their families and, pay their rent and all those things, but they're also beating them down and showing like they have the power and through intimidation. And this basically, the PRO Act does push back and prohibits any influence of union elections. What I also love, and Andy talks about this all the time, is the fact that, a lot of these elections are done at the company's location choice, right? This just allows us to have more independency, lack of, push back against influence, and have union elections at the location that the workers would agree on. It also pushes back and says, okay, accountability, because a lot of this is done and the company is literally not held accountable. So it would establish penalties for companies and executives that violate worker rights, and corporate directors and the officers are also held liable. That's very, very different from what we see. So look, we all believe in fairness. We all believe in those kinds of measures that are in place to protect workers. But, if we don't have a national federal law in place that pushes back against what we've seen so far, I really don't think we're going to continue to be successful in protecting our workers. We're going to fight for 15. We're going to fight for, universal health care. We're going to fight to push back against the economic divide in our country. But when we don't have safeguards for our workers, those again in the front lines that may not be able to march with us every single day, DSA members, or be there all the time, but we're there because they inspire us to be there. We know that they're being harmed by these structures that are set in place that benefit the corporations, billionaires, versus them. I'll leave you with all of this. What happened in Alabama, what's happening, I guess, in some of the other parts of the country, and these attack on unions. And we see it alone with General Motors right now, where they're using the push for, much more better, clean air, green jobs. They're using that as a way to make sure that when they build these battery, electric vehicles, any of that, they're using this moment to basically say, okay, well, we got to do all these, we got to get folks in here, and they're going to make sure that they're not union jobs. I mean, you can see it by just some of their measures that they've already done. I've already heard from people like Congresswoman Dingell and others that are really frustrated with the fact that they're using our movement to say we need to combat climate crisis as a moment to try to combat, to union bust. And again, they're doing it very much indirectly, but it's very obvious they're using this moment for that. What we've seen is going to reach us because Amazon and these mega billionaires are going to come to our backyard. They're already planning to. What I saw in Romulus alone when I showed up, I just showed up because they invited myself and Congresswoman Dingell, y'all. They invited us. I mean, they put it in a press release. They said, come on down anytime. We don't have nothing to hide. Okay, we show up. And we actually showed up. We introduced ourselves. We didn't think they were going to have us wait, or we thought maybe they'll say, hey, not now, let's schedule it. Whatever it is, we basically did what our workers asked us to do, and they kept contacting us, and we showed up. They called the police on us. I mean, imagine members of Congress, we introduced ourselves 3 or 4 times. They kept sending different people out. Then later that folks came out and said, oops, sorry, that was a mistake. But just think about that for one moment. If they can call the police on members of the United States Congress that they invited to their facility, what the hell are they doing to their workers at that facility? And I've already heard the intimidation tactics. I mean, they got them on tethers, y'all, like location tether. I mean, they have them, trying to meet these kinds of quotas and demands in the middle of a freaking pandemic. So know and understand, like, the PRO Act is combating that, but before the COVID, before everything that we're hearing now that's coming out of Alabama, this was happening to workers consistently. And so it is important, and I'm sorry I went long, but it really is critically important that we understand the PRO Act allows us to have those safeguards and protections so that we can have fair union elections, that we can have access to real organizing around unions. They are scared of us. And I think Jess said it, it's because they have money, but we have the people. And so we got to really drive that home as Amazon and others are trying to come to our backyard and think that they can come and not allow us to be able to organize union. I mean, our community here, Detroit, we birthed the labor rights movement. You ain't gonna come to our backyard and expect us to back down and just take these low poverty wage jobs with no protection. And they can spout all they want that they give them $15 minimum wage, but they know they give them $15 minimum wage and expect more out of them, because guess what? They're expecting more productivity out of them because they did that. A union contract would make sure that abuse wasn't happening in the workplace. So thank you all so much. And yes, it's the Senate and abolish the filibuster. So as you are pushing through PRO Act, please also make it about the fact that the, racist Jim Crow filibuster needs to be abolished, because it's not just the PRO Act that's being held up, y'all. It's also things around immigrant rights, Fight for 15. So much more is held up, gun reform, so many things that we all care about. So thank you all so much. And I really appreciate this, Jess. I thank all the DSA, members, especially my Detroit chapter members, for always showing up for our workers. Not only that, showing up for evictions, showing up to stop evictions, showing up for the water shutoff movement. You all have been there, and I can't thank you all enough for that so much. Take care.
You too. Thank you so much. And of course, I would be remiss to say the Congresswoman for the 13th District. I am so sorry. I've got Landis on the brain.
No one cares about, I heard that, and nobody cares about that. They care about what we do. So
exactly. Thank you so much, Congresswoman Tlaib, for joining us. You're a wonderful, amazing, progressive champion. We love it. We love you. And you show up in just as many places. So we are so lucky to have you. Thank you. Yes, hero to the movement. So I don't know how anyone is going to follow Rashida, but we are going to try. We do have an amazing esteemed panel with us. I briefly introduced them a little bit earlier. But first up joining us is Steve Babson, Detroit labor historian and activist, who will give us a little bit of that historical context about why we're here today.
All right. Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and I love following Rashida. Happy to be overshadowed by her wonderful commentary and her commitment. So let me give a brief sort of overview of what May Day has been about and what it represents, and the events that are often referred to simply as the Haymarket Massacre, an event in May 1st of 1886, 135 years ago, which is really sort of in the period when we're starting the first national campaigns here in the United States around workers' rights, human rights, and it's part of a long battle that stretches back to 1877 and continues today. And I'm going to focus a little bit first on the 60 years that followed 1877, because in that first 60 years, it was an especially grim time for workers in America. It's a period marked by the emergence of corporate capitalism with massive concentrations of wealth organized around the new technologies of that day, the railroads, steamships, construction of high-rises in the cities, skyscrapers, and factory-produced consumer goods, a massive change in the nature of the economy. And when workers protested the low wages and long hours, and by long hours I mean typically 12 to 14-hour days at very low wages, with massive numbers of immigrant folk being brought in, some of them brought in specifically to break strikes, but always brought in with the expectation that they would be especially vulnerable to exploitation. And when workers began to protest these circumstances, their movements were denounced as conspiracies against common law rights. And so for the first 60 years, from 1877 and on, and I'm picking that year because that was a nationwide wildcat strike across the railroad systems of the United States, leading to general strikes in several cities, with the Army called in and locked and loaded and opened fired and killed roughly 100 workers. And that set off a period of 60 years in which the typical response of management and the state to worker organization was to declare any such protest movement as a criminal conspiracy against property owners. And usually then for a strike or even a rally might initially bring a court injunction that would declare it illegal to gather in any groups around the plant that was the target of that organizational effort. Mass arrests if necessary, terror campaigns carried out by private armies, huge private armies led by the Pinkertons, most notably, but also by the Coal and Iron Police in Pennsylvania, where not typically, but often enough to discourage organization in many cases, the initial organizers in the coal industry in Pennsylvania, some of them would disappear, their bodies would be found 2-3 months later at the bottom of an abandoned mine shaft. Mass arrests, these kinds of terror campaigns, and when all else failed, mass shootings. starting in 1877, as I mentioned, but with episode after episode, where major strikes are greeted by the National Guard, by these Pinkertons, by the police, by vigilante groups organized by management, you could list one after the other going on for many, many years. Homestead in 1892, 15 dead. 1894, the Pullman strike, led by Eugene Debs, the presidential candidate, I think as many of you know, of the Socialist Party. Eugene Debs was arrested under a court injunction and jailed during that strike, and the U.S. Army was brought into Chicago to break it and killed over 30 people. And through the years, one after the other, these kinds of events, up to, including the 1930s, when in the opening years of the Great Depression, on average, roughly 30 workers would be shot dead on picket lines for attempting to change and improve their working conditions and collectively organize on behalf of a different approach to work. And leading finally to 1937, the last major shooting of workers on picket lines, the steel strike of that year, 18 dead. So this is a very grim period of time. And to become an organizer and an advocate for unions meant you had to be an especially brave and committed individual, not only motivated by desperation over low wages and long hours and abusive management, a lot of people being brought to the organization on those grounds, but the leadership tended to be the folks who were willing to take extraordinary risks of arrest and worse, as I mentioned. And so that was usually going to be people who had a wider vision for social change. And that meant progressives of many stripes, a whole range of groups that start to emerge in the 1880s when a progressive, socialist, left-wing movements of a whole range of varieties start to appear on the scene. And not all of them are socialist, but they aren't necessarily capitalists either. And it's a sort of interesting moment, particularly carried out by the Knights of Labor, the first nationwide massive organization of workers, organized, skilled and unskilled, black and white, men and women, and they were opposed to what they called wage slavery, this new system of corporate management of the economy, reducing workers to wage slaves. And their alternative was worker-owned cooperatives, supported by the state, but worker-owned cooperatives, cooperative commonwealths, as an alternative to corporate capitalism. There's also, of course, socialist groups that are starting to appear, the Social Democrats, revolutionary socialists of various stripes, who were advocating a general strike to win what was necessary to improve the lives of working people. And some of them also arguing on behalf of armed self-defense against this massive mobilization of violence against working people. And they found their stride in the 1880s, and the first nationwide campaign, and relevant very, very much so to the May Day strikes of 1886, was for the 8-hour day. And as I mentioned, typically 12, 14-hour days prevailing at this time. And we have a circumstance in which some states had passed laws to reduce hours to 8 or 10 in some cases. And across the board, what would happen is that management simply ignored them. And there was no enforcement mechanism to win the 8-hour day. And so the idea of the first 8-hour movement was to organize for general strikes, to organize a general strike that would enforce the law in many states, or bring the law to fruition in others that didn't yet have it on the books. 8 hours at no loss in pay. So it was really a very substantial and militant movement led by left-wing groups, left-wing organizations, left-wing workers across a wide spectrum of ideologies and beliefs. And probably the central point where this came to fruition was Chicago. It begins, I should mention though, that this wave of enthusiasm for an 8-hour movement and general strikes on May 1st, 1886, that enthusiasm was definitely boosted dramatically by the first major strike victory in U.S. history against one of these major robber barons. In this case, it was Jay Gould, the owner of all the railway systems in Southwest United States. And in 1885, this union, the Knights of Labor, organizing skilled, unskilled men, women, black and white, the first mass organization really in American society to organize on behalf of black and white together, skilled and unskilled, men and women as well, They actually win a victory in 1885 against Jay Gould. And this sends out a message to people that collective action and organization can actually make a difference in people's lives. And the movement begins to especially take hold in Chicago. Chicago, without a doubt, becomes the center of that 8-hour movement. And it's led by the Central Labor Union, an organization of progressive unions, socialist, revolutionary in some cases, social democratic in other cases, Knights of Labor as well. It's a real amalgam of folks brought together under the leadership of a man named Albert Parsons. And they're the ones who are going out and organizing for what became principal and major strike on behalf of 8 hours in 1886, May 1st of that year. 80,000 workers go out in Chicago. They hold a massive rally, which is peaceful, and the strikes continue in the days thereafter. But of course, again, characteristically, management's going to respond with violence, and they do so on May 3rd, 2 days later, an assault on the strikers at the McCormick Reaper plant in Chicago. 6 are killed. 6 workers are killed by the police firing point blank into the crowd. And there's a protest on May 4th at Haymarket in Chicago to protest this, yet again, another case in which workers are simply being gunned down for seeking an improvement in their wages and hours and working conditions. And that rally is actually fairly small. It's raining, and at the end of the rally, it's beginning to disperse. The mayor of Chicago, who's at the rally, orders the police to demobilize. There's no need to attack them. Nevertheless, 180 police show up at the very end of the rally, order the crowd to disperse, and immediately begin to assault the crowd, at which point someone throws a bomb that killed several police officers. The police in turn fire into the crowd and kill, we don't know how many, but it's estimates that range upwards of 35 dead and maybe 100 wounded as a result of that violence on May 4th. Albert Parsons, the head of the Central Labor Union, and 6 others are accused of responsibility for those deaths. And they are accused not on the basis of any participation in the event at all. Only 2 of them were actually at the rally on May 4th. The rest of them all of them are accused for responsibility for those deaths on the basis of the speeches they had given in the preceding days, which were deemed to be incendiary and provocative. So it's on the basis of their speech that they are then convicted of murder. And by a jury, by the way, that included one of them was a brother of one of the policemen who had died, and half of them had testified that they had already decided they were guilty before they were even admitted to the jury. There's a year-long campaign on behalf of the Chicago martyrs, as they were soon to become, and in the following year, 4 of them were hung. 1 of them had committed suicide. 2 of the cases were commuted. And the Chicago martyrs, Albert Parsons, August Spies, the rest of them, become a global representation of what's happening to working people around the world. And it's on that certain basis that finally the Second International declares it May 1st, 1890, as the kickoff for an annual celebration of the Chicago martyrs, but also the broader efforts to organize workers around the world. And that period then leads to, finally, and I'm going to jump way ahead here, I'm going to jump to the 1930s, because year by year there's many such grim moments in labor history. There's a period, World War I, where there's some advances made, but those are revoked in the 20s. Again, violence used to destroy worker organizations across the board. In the early 1930s, again, the use of massive violence to prevent worker organization. Finally, 1935, the National Labor Relations Act is passed, and it appears again to give a step forward in the same way that 8-hour legislation had appeared to give a step forward many decades before. But once again, employers simply ignored the law in 1935, which finally gave workers the right to organize and advocate on behalf of unionization without fear of being fired or discriminated against. That law was ignored by management until the sit-down strikes. And the sit-down strikes were led by progressives in a wide range of industries. Here in Detroit, of course, principally the auto industry, socialists, communists, New Deal Democrats, farmer labor rights, a whole range of progressives who finally said, and it's a militant minority, it's not initially a groundswell, it's that people who are willing to take a risk and say, no more of this, we're going to occupy the factories in a citizen's arrest to enforce the law, to enforce you, the employer, to recognize the law, at which point we'll give you your factories back. And it's that finally establishes the rights of workers to speak on behalf, to organize without fear of being gunned down, as they had been by the hundreds in the preceding decades. And that's, of course, the CIO, the Congress of Industrial Organizations, kind of hearkening back also to the same ideas of Knights of Labor, organizing skilled and unskilled together, black and white, men and women. Of course, not easily. There's a lot of prejudice that has to be addressed in the years that follow, but that's the principle upon which that new labor movement was organized. And that brings us up to the National Labor Relations Act, and the law as it is now no longer actually all that meaningful for folks who find themselves subject to intimidation, threats, browbeating, and firings, no longer being gunned down on the picket lines, at least not as often, and not in the United States. Much of that has been exported along with our jobs to a global arena. So it's those circumstances that now bring us to the point where the PRO Act is so necessary to actually make those rights real again. And lastly, I'll say, it'll be a combination of legislative initiative backed up by and made real by collective action and organization in the workplace. It's not one or the other, it's both.
Incredible history lesson from Steve Babson. Fascinating. I learned a lot, and I thought I knew a lot about labor history. Really wonderful lecture you just gave there. It was wonderful. Thank you, Steve, so much.
I felt like Monty Python doing the history of the world part one.
Well, I've greatly appreciated it, and I think it grounds us so perfectly well in this moment. Just like back when the Flint workers on the line sat down bravely, just as Steve just discussed, across the progressive spectrum, folks across the left spectrum today, every single corner of the left spectrum needs to come together to focus on passing this incredibly important, vital legislation, right? It is incredibly vital. So thank you, Steve. So I thought that, Rashida was a hard act to follow. Steve, I see why you said you could rise to the challenge, but now Steve is quite a hard act to follow. But we do want to make sure that we bring in some of the folks who are right in the midst of the fight, folks who have been longtime union members, union activists, and first up to discuss what the importance of workers coming together, to fight through their union, to win that massive reform, systemic change, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to call it revolutionary change. We need to come together through our unions and fight, and he's going to talk about how the PRO Act can help us do that. So Jason, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jess, and thanks, Steve. That was incredible. Tell everyone, get this book, Working Detroit. Steve is an incredible labor historian, and we're very grateful. I'm very grateful to hear him tonight. Grateful to everyone on this call, Congresswoman Tlaib and Congressman Andy Levin and ATSI brothers. I mean, this is a great panel. I'm really glad to be here. It's fired me up. We were at the rally today down at the Labor Legacy Monument. It's fired up there. This is Detroit. As Steve knows, as everybody on this call knows, this is the home of the labor movement. We could talk about Chicago. We could talk about New York. I love what they're doing down in Bessemer. This is the home of the labor movement. This is Detroit, okay? This is where it all comes. I mean, people have been looking to the Motor City for labor rights and to lead the gauntlet against corporate greed. And this is Detroit. So yeah, we got big shoes to we got big shoes to fill. It's our turn in the barrel. We talk about this in my union all the time. We elevate the labor leaders of the past. We stand alongside the labor leaders of the present. This is our turn in the barrel, right? Like, this is not previous generations. They fought their battles. It's not the kids' time yet. This is our time in the barrel. We've got to step up. This PRO Act is so vital. So I know in UAW, when we hit the line or we go anywhere, we start off with, "We are the union, the mighty, mighty union." And that's what we got to have. We got to have that attitude going in. I mean, we got really big shoes to fill here in Detroit. We are the vanguard. These corporations, they can never beat us down. Steve laid it out. We've been here forever. We're going to be here forever. The workers are going to be here forever. We're going to continue to fight. There's no way we're backing down. Fighting for the PRO Act is what we're about right now. We see what the disadvantages that we've had since the passage of the National Labor Relations Act, the abuses that corporate America has laid in violation of existing labor law, which is why we need this new language to give some heft and weight to laws that are already on the book and add new laws. I have to tell you, Rashida mentioned it. Hearing her talk about when the corporations marched into Michigan, the home of the labor movement, and passed right to work. I never thought I would ever see that day. I grew up in a Teamster household. I've been UAW for 25 years. I never thought I would see right to work in Michigan. But they had the gall to come in here and do that. The PRO Act is our revenge. Gets rid of right to work laws. Forget about it. Across the country. You think you can come to Michigan? You think you can come to Ohio, wherever? No, nowhere. It's illegal. You can't do it. We need that passed. We need to have that on our side. I want to talk a little bit about my own personal experience. I worked in a factory for close to 20 years. We were machining engine blocks on the rough end. These come in from Cleveland Casting. They're rough cast iron blocks of metal that we have to machine. Because of the UAW and our health and safety department, there are protections that we have protecting our lungs from the air that we're breathing. So as the machine cuts the engine block, it creates all kinds of particulate. That has to be contained, has to be treated. We can't be breathing that. I'll just share an example of how my membership in the labor union protected me and my family. We had one of the big vents on the rough end, the cast iron block, become dislodged. Particulate shooting everywhere. We called our union steward. He came down. The health and safety rep came down, and they shut it. They shut the whole rough end down. They didn't care who needed finished blocks. They didn't care, what the Crown Vics. We were putting these in the Crown Vics. They didn't care about how many Crown Vics weren't going to get built that day. We shut that whole rough end down, and that's the power of the union, and that's a real power. I don't have to work in an unsafe condition. I don't have to put myself in jeopardy. And I thank the union every day for that. And people want to talk about union, non-union. To me, that's worth any amount of union dues that I have to pay. The fact that I go to work and I know that I have a collective bargaining agreement behind me that says I do not have to put myself in danger. I don't have to risk not coming home that day to see my loved ones. So, this is it. This is what we're talking about. This is real life, people. This isn't just, Washington mumbo jumbo, see it on the news or whatever. This is real life that we're living every day. We got to get this PRO Act passed because when we talk about, what would the PRO Act mean for me and my coworkers, we have these lunch table discussions. We sit, on our breaks, have a cup of coffee, talk about politics, talk about whatever. Sometimes I gotta, slap down a few Trumpies. It's just like that kind of thing that goes on, verbally, of course. But to me, and this always quiets some of the more conservative coworkers that I have, which is to me should be an anomaly. If you're in a union, you should know which side you're on. If you're in the UAW, you should know which side you're on. We're dealing with that, as you know, nationwide, but I tell this to them all the time. This is about, you may be good, there's a lot of UAW guys right now, and it's mostly guys who have this attitude about, I'm good. You know, I got mine. I did my 30 years. Well, you know what? You got your 30 years because of the blood and sacrifice. Steve laid it out. People died so you could have yours. So to sit back and say, oh, well, I don't care about, the teacher strike, or I don't care about the fast food workers, or I don't care about Amazon organizing, shut it down. You know how I do that? I have a conversation, I look them, I say, where are your kids gonna work? Where are your kids gonna get health care? What union are your kids gonna join? This is real life, people. I have beautiful children. I want the best for them. I want them to get an education, fulfill their promise and who they are as individuals. And I want, support them in their effort to get an education. Honestly, the best thing, I would feel so comfortable if they all had union cards. Yeah, I want to go to their graduation, college, high school. One day they come to me and say, Dad, look at my union card. You know what? I'll know they're good. I won't have to worry as a father anymore. That's what this is about, the future. We're fighting right now for future generations, for all workers, whether in the United States, Mexico, China, across the world. This is a global movement. Today's a global day for solidarity. And I get fired up talking about this because, I feel very, very strongly about, union and my membership in union and my belief that every worker in this country should be in a labor union. So, appreciate it.
Jason, thank you so much for that rousing, amazing speech you just gave. I could not agree more. This is real life, right? This is, we just passed Workers' Memorial Day, a day to remember folks who just showed up to do their job, right? They just showed up to work, right? They just wanted to make a living. And they were the victim of accidents. I see folks talking in the chat about how their loved ones suffered. Someone's father died due to hazardous working conditions. Christopher, I'm so sorry to hear that. So it's really real, right? And I would be remiss if I didn't say, if you got fired up listening to him talk and want to fight to make sure this change happens, make sure to sign up for one of our phone banks. I'll be sharing this link again. Don't worry, I'll bug you. But this is how we make that change. So thank you so much, Jason, for those amazing remarks. Up next, we have two more incredible seasoned veterans of the labor movement. Hope that's a compliment. Absolutely. Not to mention the seasoned veteran of the labor movement that will be joining us later tonight. But Josh and Ascamp and Tom Burke, again, members of our IATSE Local 26, the stagehands, and members of our Grand Rapids DSA, love this cross-Michigan representation. And again, here to talk about the impacts of COVID on the workplace. So Josh and Tom, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, everybody. I love being referred to as a veteran of the labor movement, considering I became the business agent about a month before COVID started. But I've been a member for 25 years and I've been involved in my local that whole time. The entertainment industry got hit real hard when COVID started. It's amazing. IATSE International, there's about 250,000 members. At one time, we were lucky to have, as a whole, 10% working through COVID here. In West Michigan, most of my membership has worked less than 10 days in the last year doing stage work. Our industry was just totally decimated, as many of you recognize that we're not doing any big concerts or plays. For a year now, Michigan, IATSE stagehands with other unions, gig workers, and hotel and restaurant employees held rallies for unemployment at the state capitol. We demanded expanded and continued unemployment while we are out of work. Now we want 26 weeks restored to what it was before Snyder came in and decided the Republicans were going to fix unemployment. By fix it, they did exactly the opposite. they could have burnt it to the ground and started over, and we would be better off. The system's so inadequate and just doesn't work at all anymore. So we want 26 restored by the Michigan lawmakers, specifically the Republican legislators that fixed it in the first place. We would also like them to adjust for the amounts to account for inflation. I mean, what's it been, 20 years since there's been anything to help people on unemployment looking for work. I get it. Nobody wants to live on unemployment. People act like that's what people are going to go do. Many people in our industry, it's not what we want, but nobody's going to train us to do the work that we want when as soon as COVID's over, we're going to go back to do the job we love. I mean, I'm not even interested in leaving an employer hanging like that, although I'm sure there's several employers that deserve that. It's just not real. And in our industry, it's it shut down. March 30th was my D-Day, as I called it, where I called up many of our members and referents and said, yeah, that job you were going to tonight, yeah, that's gone. And that one that you were planning on doing tomorrow, that's gone. We're working on things, but we couldn't promise anything. There wasn't a whole lot of strength written into our contracts then. Since that's happened, we've had a few contracts come up, and here I am, a rookie business agent, trying to negotiate cost of living increases at the least during the pandemic, where there's no work to be had. It's been a challenge, and I'm not giving up. And Tom knows I'm working at it every day, but it's a challenge because well, you're not working. Why do you need a raise? Well, if it were up to them, okay, you don't work for 2 years, you get no raises. Okay, now I'm at least 2 years worth of inflation behind what I already was. They just don't account for that. Well, it's just not, you're not working, it doesn't matter. At the end of it, it does. When our industry does come back, it's not going to be just like turning the water back on and the water starts flowing and all the stagehands go back to work. It's going to take these tours and productions quite some time to put things back together. Many of them talk at least 6 weeks of rehearsals, teching the show, and then there's the whole planning the tour around COVID hotspots. One of the things we got, one of the things we got going on for us is even when it starts, the reason we're asking for 26 weeks at least continued benefits is so as the work is spotty at the beginning, when it comes back, that we got other weeks that we can work off from. It's a challenge out there. Don't give up. I'm not giving up. I know nobody on this panel has given up. I'm going to turn it over to Tom to talk about the PRO Act and what it means to us. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Josh. I want to send greetings on International Workers' Day, solidarity to workers out there and around the world, sisters, brothers, kinfolk, and comrades. We have before us a big opportunity with the PRO Act. It's also connected to the Fight for 15. And I'm very, very happy we were able to dump Trump and get rid of him. And it's a new day when you see the President of the United States talk about what our demands are and the things that will make labor stronger again. But we can't rely on the politicians. So it passed through the House and no problem. But when it gets to the Senate, it's a lot of difficulty because there's a lot of Republicans and there's also a few what we call blue dog Democrats. They're not necessarily pro-labor, and all the politicians have to deal with Wall Street and the big owners of industry and the banks and finance houses. And what do we have? We have our own power. That's what we have. So we have to get ourselves organized and build up the unions again. The way the historian was talking about. We got to use that spirit and use that sentiment, but we also have to figure out some new ways to do things in the era that we live in while maintaining the militant tactics of the past. So that's where we're at. Things that the PRO Act will help us do is it allows workers to form and join unions without a lot of the current laws and roadblocks and difficulties. Now, not all of the difficulties can be laid at the feet of the laws. Sometimes the corporations, all right, not sometimes, most of the time the corporations cheat, and that's how they win. So they use different methods. They use high-paid firms that all they do is try to break unions. And that's what we're up against. The PRO Act will change some of that for us. What am I talking about? Captive audience meetings. Those shouldn't be allowed. That's where they take you and keep you in a room and they just have a one-sided message for you. Likewise, companies stall and try to prevent elections, or even after the union wins the election, they draw out the process of negotiating a contract so long that eventually the conditions change and you never get to the actual contract with the union. That's another way to defeat things. And of course, the courts are on their side. We live in a country that's ruled by a capitalist class, right? So the government works for them. It's not in existence to work for us, but we have to try to demand reforms and win, and the PRO Act is part of that for us. Another big thing to understand about the PRO Act is it deals with what we call casual labor. Labor that is not defined as being, either the 8-hour day kind of traditional worker, nor is it defined as a professional or semi-professional workplace where you're actually your own boss. So what they're doing is they're taking whole categories of employment and saying you're a contractor or you're your own boss. And it's just simply not true. And that law they just passed in California, AB 5, about the Uber and Lyft drivers, that's what they're trying to shove down our throats now. The only people this helps is the big corporations and the banks. So who does this affect? Obviously, rideshare workers, construction workers. If you go out and work in construction, this affects you. In some cases, even warehouse workers. Also, writers and tech workers in the new tech industry, which isn't really all that new. It's just we haven't been able to organize it, but it affects tech workers. So anyone who you would call a gig worker, when you're a stagehand, that's most of the other people you work in a building and an industry with are these gig workers. And we want to transform life for them and make it a place where they look forward to what kind of job they have and how much pay and benefits, health care. So we need national health care. We need to do away with this, I got mine attitude like Jason talked about. Finally, this would affect like the Amazon drives, So if we can get things that are in the PRO Act, it can change everything. And then we also need to get our own unions to change their outlook. We need the AFL-CIO, the Teamsters, the postal workers, the United Food and Commercial Workers to all get in a room and decide that they're going to go out and organize the entire industry, right? That's right, Jason. We're looking at Amazon, where the guy has $200 billion in his pocket, and he's not out to get his market share. He's out to seize the entire market and monopolize it. So the unions need to respond likewise. We need to go out and seize the workplace, the entire workplace. UPS, the post office, FedEx, DHL, I see their trucks. Amazon, take it all and put it in our hands. We have the power. We should have the control. We produce all the wealth. I'm going to say one more thing, which is it may get attached to the infrastructure bill and then the negotiations start So we may see bits and pieces of that. So hang in there, keep campaigning for it to pass. You know, we're going to get knocked down sometimes, but we get back up again. There's a really good song like that. I want to say that there's another option that exists that people are starting to talk about. And that's that if Joe Biden wants to show how pro-union he is, he can start using presidential orders to change some of the current election rules and impose a different approach to labor union organizing that gives us more freedom to associate, more freedom to express our views, faster processes. When workers say they want unions, they should get unions. It should take weeks, not months and years. And let's take the power into our hands and make it happen. Solidarity.
Solidarity, brother. Thank you so much, Tom, for those incredibly inspiring words. I am right there with you. We are going to struggle together in solidarity and fight for this change that we need. I have to put another plug in real quick. Make those calls, folks. Someone please share that link for the Action Network. We are making calls with CWA. We need to get this passed. And we need to channel all of this energy into organizing. So that brings us to our last speaker, our other headliner this evening, incredible bookends, if I can say. Another seasoned veteran of the labor movement. I mentioned this before, but I cannot underscore it enough, has the work that Congressman Levin did in his time as a union organizer has produced thousands of union organizers across the country who have risen through the ranks of labor unions, progressive organizers, socialist organizers, folks who are committed to fighting for workers, just an incredible champion for not only the working class, but for the PRO Act in particular, been hitting the dang pavement in Congress. I know you've been on both sides of the aisle advocating. It sailed through the House with 5 Republican votes. I'm sure in no small part because of the congressman's ardent support for the bill and for the rights of workers. So the congressman from District 9 right here in Michigan, my neighbor, and a fellow comrade in the struggle for workers' rights, the wonderful, honorable Congressman Levin. I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Jess. Happy May Day, everybody. International Workers' Day. America may ignore it, but we will never ignore it. Corporate America may ignore it. Most of my colleagues don't even know what the fuck it is. But May Day is Workers' Day, always will be. You know, I'm glad, I guess you're calling out Union Summer. You know, we called the participants Summeristas, Jess, and we had Union Summer babies, and and a lot of the people who participated went on to amazing careers, and that stuff is still going on. This summer, I'm doing Democracy Summer in my, you know, right out on the ground here, if you know any young people who want to do that. So I want to pick up where Tom left off and kind of, man, this has been so amazing. I mean, brother Steve Babson and the history lesson, just incredible. And look, don't think this is about, the PRO Act thing is about like a nice conversation between like a bunch of congressmen and women and senators and all that. No way. Let's just look at the history of labor law reform. Since whoever they passed, our ancestors, the Wagner Act, the National Labor Relations Act in 1935, the United States Congress has not passed a bill, a paragraph, a sentence, a goddamn comma that makes it easier for workers in the private sector to organize and bargain. And meanwhile, the Congress passed the Taft-Hartley amendments over Truman's veto. They passed the Landrum-Griffin bill under Eisenhower, and the federal government, the state government, local governments, legislation, regulation, and also judicial decisions have basically killed worker voice and power through death by 1,000 cuts in every way. Like Tom was mentioning how like a lot of workers, most workers aren't even workers. They're not even employees to be covered by the NLRA. And that's what that Prop 22 in California was about, partly. Anyway, so under Jimmy Carter, Democrats tried labor law reform. It wasn't nearly the PRO Act, nothing close. And it died in a filibuster with Democratic senators, okay? Both senators from Arkansas, as I recall. The historian will correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, Bill Clinton didn't even fucking try it. Okay, personally, that was good because I was a law student and I got to be the staff attorney. Well, I was a contractor my third year of law school, and then I went into the U.S. Department of Labor when Reich was there to be the staff attorney for his Blue Ribbon Commission. If you don't want to do something, right, Jason, make a Blue Ribbon Commission. Talk about it. And it was an amazing opportunity for me. John Dunlop, the chair of it, gave me one page, Steve, to say like card check versus quick elections or first contract. And I had to do the decision memo in one page. It was a disciplining, experience. It was cool. But anyway, and by the way, Doug Frazier was on that commission and he dissented from the final report because it didn't include card check. But the month or something like a month after that report came out of that fancy commission, the Republicans swept the power in the 1994 election, and Newt Gingrich became the speaker, and it collected. So that was Bill Clinton. Okay, Barack Obama. Come on, you all remember this. He healthcare, okay? He's not about to do Medicare for all, which is what we demand, right? But he did ACA. Okay, I'm not saying that's nothing, but he shot his whole wad on that. By the time he got around to the Employee Free Choice Act, he didn't put anything into it, and it died in a filibuster. Now, Steve, I'm gonna be pretty brief here, y'all, because I want to have Q&A, and so Steve may correct me or others, but I think, listen, y'all, when the Congress passed the Wagner Act, again, like this moment, it wasn't, FDR is such a great man or whatever, Senator Wagner. What was to become the CIO, what people were on the march, workers were on the march. In 1934 and 1935, they were organizing and capital didn't like it and it was out of control. And so it was easier to pass labor law reform because they were like, channel this stuff somehow, have them organized in some kind of controlled way, So I'm just saying, Jess, I'm so grateful for what you said. I am fighting for this. It is my number one priority. As much as my eyes are too big for my stomach as a congressperson, I'm all about human rights. I'm all about the Green New Deal and climate change legislation. And I'm all about healthcare and, so many things. But this is the most important change we can make because it's about the working class. So what Tom said, this is about working class power. And, after basically the National Labor Relations Act is the only really big reform we ever made. And from 1935 to 1975, we had the most equal society we've ever had. Still a capitalist society, still, but if I could share my screen, I would. I've got, but you all know this, like the EPI, chart where they show how much of the income goes to the top 10% and the level of unionization in the last 100 years. Those two lines are in inverse proportion, like a beautiful two dancers who are perfect. As unionization goes up, the share of wealth that the rich get goes down. And by far the closest in the last 100 years was 1935 to 1975, and it started to get worse. So today we got 6% of workers in unions in the private sector. It was something like that before the Wagner Act was passed. Between the late 1947 and 1952 were the peak. It got up to about 35%. And the only way we're going to do that, And I think Eric Loomis's work has shown this really well. Yeah, we could take on the boss and we could take on, but if the state is totally in the boss's pocket, if the laws are totally in the boss's pocket, it's hard for workers to win. So like Jason and Tom were both saying, the boss is still going to be cheating, whatever. But if the laws are way better, at least workers have a chance. Now, I started organizing workers for SEIU in 1983. And by the way, my first campaign, and this is about Bessemer for a minute. My first campaign, I walked into Irene Podine's kitchen in Grand Haven, Michigan, and drank her horrible coffee in that Mr. Coffee. And, you know, I spent so much time in Irene's kitchen. She was amazing. She was a genius. But they had lost, brothers and sisters. They had lost. And when I helped them organize was the second time. That's when they won. So, is it a big shock that the workers at Bessemer didn't win? No. Anyway, I use the National Labor Relations Board process. And throughout the 80s, I organized lots of healthcare workers. But you know what? My union at the SEIU abandoned the NLRA after that, because the board process, because it's so absurdly unfair. And if you think of SEIU, their two great campaigns since then, Justice for Janitors and Home Care Workers, didn't use the board at all. And, so it's ridiculous. The biggest company in this country in terms of workers, Walmart, 1.3 million workers. How many union members? At thousands of workplaces. Are you kidding me? Zero union members? Some mathematician could tell you that wouldn't even be possible. Mathematically, what are the statistical chances of that if workers had any chance of forming a union? But so we've got to change the laws. I'm happy to kind of march through this, but let me just say one more thing before I quit, Jess. This isn't just about workers in general. This is about racial and gender justice. Like if you look at union membership, it raises wages for everybody, right? But it also really raises wages for women and people of color. Non-union workers, women workers make just over $750 a week. Union member women make just over $1,000 a week. That's a week. And the boss tells you, oh my God, you might pay $25 in dues. They're making $250 more a week. African-American workers who are non-union members make under $750 a week. Union members make close to $900. Latinx workers who are union members make over $900 a week, and non-union members make well under $750. We have got to do this for every reason. We've got to unite the working class, straight, queer, white, black, Latinx, Asian Americans, Native Americans, young, old. Let's get the whole working class together, and the way to do that is through unions. Okay, I got to say one more thing. Because somebody, Tom was saying about, the unions of today. Again, Steve could correct me. But look, after the Wagner Act, the National Labor Relations Act was passed, did the unions that were there before mostly grow? Yeah. I think it helped the carpenters, it helped whatever, the AFL unions, no question. But you know what? The vast majority of the growth was in unions that didn't even exist before. The rubber workers, the auto workers, the steel workers, the mine workers. So let's not be arrogant. If you're an IATSE member, a UAW member, SEIU, whatever, these gig workers, these high-tech workers, these whatever workers, they may form their own unions, and God bless them. Let working people form whatever organization they want in their democratic choosing. So Jess, this is it. This is the cause of my life, and I am down for this struggle until we win. But I think we got to have a movement out there, not just a bunch of Congress people talking to each other. Thank you.
Woo, I didn't unmute myself. I was so excited. Thank you so much to the Congressman Levin, for those incredible words. I felt like I got both fired up and another history lesson a little bit there, and also very jealous of your law school internships. So yes, and I would say also, you said your eyes are too big as your stomach, bigger than your stomach, and you're in a room full of socialists. So you don't have to worry about that here. But I do want to say we have about 10 minutes, right, for Q&A. Just want to make sure your time and other folks' time. And so we are taking questions from the audience. If you want to use the Q&A box or the chat function, if you would like me to direct the question to a specific panelist, let me know. Otherwise, I will pose the question and allow a few folks to answer. So the first question I have is from Anthony. So Anthony is a 3L in law school, and I think this question might make sense for the congressman. I'm not sure if you are a dirty lawyer, Josh, and would want to take this as well, but he was wondering what he can do within the legal field to help the union and workers movement, and then we'll have one on the PRO Act after that.
Yeah, so there's a lot of great union side labor law firms where lawyers devote their lives to fighting for workers. They make a lot less than corporate lawyers, but they're really important for the struggle. Also, I think I'm the only member of Congress who does this, but I have a labor law fellow. I don't have money to pay for it, but I always have somebody like beyond my staff that I'm allotted that just works on workers' rights and worker power. Right now, I'm just gonna call out his name. He's not here or anything, but Colton Puckett has been doing it. He's amazing. And so also the Progressive Caucus, the CPC, we also, that's the one other thing I can think of that has, a position like that. You can go on the staff of the most, union-oriented members or the Help Committee in the Senate, or the Education Labor Committee. I mean, there's not jobs open very much, but that's a possibility. Also, I don't know what your situation is, but if you, if you can, and if you could swing it, go organize yourself. It's an unbelievable experience. And if you already did that, that's cool. And you want to straight up do law, but also feel free to be in touch with me. Nicole can maybe, if she hasn't put her stuff in the chat, but I'm happy to. The most important thing in life is mentoring young progressives, right? So.
I mean, look, if we can hook somebody up with an internship in this conversation, I feel like we are building a workers' movement. No. So something that came in that's a little bit more on the meat of the substance of the issue, and I think this is a great question for Steve. So Steve, how did we get the New Deal as a concession from the 1930s organizing, and how would you say the PRO Act and union organizing would be a core part of our fight for a Green New Deal?
Okay, this piggybacks off of Andy's comment about the National Labor Relations Act, and that it was not Franklin Roosevelt championing the rights of workers. In fact, Roosevelt opposed the National Labor Relations Act when it was initially brought before Congress, and so did Perkins, his Secretary of Labor. And it was only because, as Andy again mentioned, your history was right on. It was only because of the massive groundswell of organizing from 33, 34, 35, strikes that swept across the South, the Midwest, general strikes in Minnesota, general strikes in San Francisco. In those two cases, successful. In the case of the South and the textile strike, unsuccessful, but 14 killed by the National Guard, which was called out in 18 states across the United States. I mean, this was a groundswell, boots on the ground, across a whole range of industries. Here in Detroit, when finally the National Labor Relations Act was made real after its passage in '35, made real by the sit-down strikes, it was across every, hotels, restaurants, cigar workers, automakers, auto workers, and steel workers. It was that movement that made the difference. Without it, the National Labor Relations Act would not have been passed.
Thank you so much, Steve. I don't know if anyone else wanted to take a stab at that, but I could not agree more that we need the same, if not more, labor militancy these days in order to get an amazingly necessary massive reform like the Green New Deal. So the next question that I have here is how we are pushing for immigration reform. So you mentioned that Jason mentions there's been a problem with getting this to be a priority, and that Latinos have been the most the most of the essential workers. Sorry, I'm just trying to figure out how to phrase this during the pandemic. But I did, before I turn it over to the panel, want to mention that this would be one of the most significant pieces of civil rights legislation since the Voting Rights Act because of the protections it would extend specifically to undocumented workers. It would be revolutionary for folk like migrant workers, folks who are routinely abused and beaten down because of their status. Their status is used as a threat by their employers. It's used as a tool to drive down wages across the industries, right? The PRO Act would specifically allow undocumented workers to organize into unions and to organize their workplace without fear of retaliation. So I don't know if anyone else wanted to take a stab at how they see sort of the PRO Act and immigration reform sort of being linked and how we would fight them. I would mention also probably fighting against the filibuster would be another key piece to this. I don't know if any of the other panelists wanted to take a shot at, I was looking at the congressman, but I didn't want to put you on the spot.
I want to sort of tie the last question and this question together. You know, I'm an original co-sponsor of the Green New Deal, and AOC and I are relaunching our EV Freedom Act and, you know, whatever, I'm all into that. But I just want to be really clear. There is no just transition without the PRO Act. There is no just transition without workers being free to form unions. You know, back when I started in, 2018, I was elected in 2018, and the Sunrise folks were like, well, you got to get on this Green New Deal thing. And I read it, and I was like, okay, most vulnerable and frontline communities, totally down for that. But you have to add most affected workers. And it didn't happen. So I didn't get on. And then we took office, and Alex had her actual, what became the Green New Deal resolution. And we put it in there. It's in there. And the point is, we're never gonna, have a just transition. And likewise, I don't think we're going to pass fully adequate immigration reform until we transform worker power in the country. That's just what I think. You know, we could vote, I'll vote for, citizenship, 11 million undocumented people, workers' rights, everything. But I don't believe it's going to pass until workers have more power in society and they educate themselves through their organization, their own organization that they pay for by themselves and they control, called a union, and then they elect more people who will, vote for real change. I was a union organizer when IRCA passed, the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986. That's what before that, we didn't have this I-9 and all that. That's the law that put the idea that we should enforce immigration laws into the workplace. That's horrible. And has it worked? Obviously not. It doesn't work. But the boss uses it. Employers use it. They hire undocumented people knowingly. And then if those workers ever try to form a union, they do a self-raid and call La Migra. So it's just, this is a huge fight, but I just think that the way that workers' rights are tied together with immigration struggles and the existential struggle to deal with the way we've been frying our planet, is just, it's inseparable. That's all.
Thank you so much, Congressman. I don't think I could agree more. So we have another question, and again, this is sort of open to the panel. I'm sort of looking to our rank and file members on the panel for this one, though. What sectors of the U.S. economy should we be targeting to organize? This is a big question. Josh, go ahead.
All of them.
Yes, mass labor movement. That's right. I could not agree more. Jason, did you have an answer?
Oh, well, we were just talking about it today at the rally. When we talk about union density, you know, Andy's talked about it, Steve's talked about it. We all know where we're at. We all seen that graph. We were talking about it today at the rally. We need an America where when you go to Taco Bell, they're unionized. When you go to the movies, they're unionized. When you go, you know, you get your deliveries, they're unionized. So I agree with Josh, everyone. We need everyone to be organized. And that's what we talk about, you know, in some of our labor groups, at work and, you know, at the UAW, organize everyone. And that has to be our goal.
I love that answer. I will say, if I may, I think logistics is another industry that Amazon is a massive employer. Something we should think about. All I'm saying. Tom, yes, would you like to give your 2 cents?
Yeah, thank you. I think we have a problem with our unions, and it's a problem of leadership. It's a problem of vision, and there's some very good trade union leaders in the country, but you know, what are they going to wait till we're down to 5% of the private sector? Like, when does it change? You know, I purposefully never became a staffer in a union because I think that the rank and file has to be reached and transformed into a different type of mindset and a different type of union. And I'm all for people like myself winning elected offices in unions. And I'm not against the staffers, but I think the staffers are often frustrated by leaders who are just satisfied with being pretty well paid and running things into the ground. And I think we really need to go back to what Steve called the militant minority. And I would encourage people to join existing unions and turn them into fighting unions, because that's the pathway. And that's a particular view, and it can be debated, but that's the pathway to victory. We have to take the unions we have and change them into fighting unions that people want to join. I once did an SEIU campaign in Chicago against a Catholic hospital run by a nun, and she cleverly went and got an SEIU contract from another hospital that was a dog of a contract. And she passed out our union's contract to defeat our organizing drive because the union hadn't done these other hospital workers right. Now that's unusual, but you know, and that nun lived on the Gold Coast where all the millionaires lived, you know. But we can win if we have fighting unions. People want to join us. When the Teamsters went on strike in 97 with Ron Carey, I was an SEIU custodian. Our union got all these calls asking us to come organize people because they didn't care what union it was. They just looked it up and found us. They want fighting unions. So go join a union and turn it into what you want it to be. Thank you.
Tom knows that he is opening up a can of worms with that there. No, thank you for that perspective, Tom. Steve, would you like to weigh in?
Just a minor thing, just to piggyback on what Tom just said. The sit-down strike that finally made labor rights real began with that militant minority, and it was a small group. They felt strongly they had majority support, but most people were cautious and wary and concerned, and it was that militant minority with a broader vision of change that were able to win those earliest moments in the sit-down wave, and thereby demonstrate to the hesitant majority that success was possible. And that's what brings in those masses of people. But there have to be folks willing to take a risk.
Thank you so much, Steve. And I think that is a great question to end on. I will say one last piece. Unions actually have never been more popular than they are today. They just did a poll actually about this maybe 2 weeks ago, that they're at their zenith in terms of in the last 100 years. Not their zenith, excuse me. I hope not, never. They're at a high, an all-time high, an historic high, and business and bosses are at an all-time low in terms of popularity. That means people are willing to fight for unions, right? Not just make the unions into fighting unions, but to fight so that everybody across this country can have and enjoy the right to a union job. I'm a proud member of CWA myself, and I will fight every day to make sure that every worker in this country has the same protections and rights as me, and better. We are gonna be just returning back with this legislation to what our grandparents fought for, right, and enjoyed. We want more than that. We are gonna go for what we can now with the army that we have, with the fight that we have. And again, this could not be a more consequential fight. I don't know if anyone wants to make any last remarks before we go, but I do want to say again, if you're interested in making calls with us, we have the Action Network form. Again, those thousands and hundreds of thousands of calls moved members of the United States Senate, which is maybe the most unresponsive chamber in the history of the chamber. Andy, you went off mute. I didn't know if you wanted to make a few closing remarks before we ended.
No, Jess, I just want to thank you all so much. We need you to make those calls. I'm pleading with you, really. And if you know, it can be frustrating, just like other kind of calls can be, but believe me, every House and Senate office quantifies what calls they get. They categorize what calls they get. And there's only 3 Democratic senators left who haven't co-sponsored the PRO Act, the 2 Arizona senators and Warner of Virginia. And we need them, and we should push for some Republicans, even though I'm skeptical. And I just want to thank, DSA plays a unique role, and it's super important. And I just am grateful to y'all. Thanks, Jess.
Thank you all so much. Thank you to our esteemed guests. Before we head out, please take this quick poll so we can get in touch with you. I am so excited to fight alongside all of these panelists and every single person that joined us tonight. Again, in the first Michigan DSA call ever. We've never done a statewide event like this before. Very exciting times here for the Democratic Socialists of America. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your night. Thank you for joining us. Solidarity and happy May Day. Bye.